congressional district is like a clash of cultures in microcosm. We are going to meet now somebody who wants to actually represent this sprawling 11-county district. The conventional wisdom is that the northern counties of the 20th are more conservative, while the southern portion of the district is evolving to reflect the politics of second homeowners from downstate. In 2008, when voters were asked to replace Kirsten Gillibrand, they elected, or rather 2009, they elected Scott Murphy to the seat after a contentious battle with then Assembly Minority Leader Jim Tedesco. This time around, Murphy faces a combat veteran who is also an academic. Colonel Chris Gibson hails from Kinderhook. He's a retired Army colonel with a Ph.D. He did a stint at the Hoover Institution and wrote a scholarly book exploring the relationship between military and civilian leaders. I want to thank Colonel Chris Gibson for joining us in the press room.
Well, listen, thanks very much. It's an honor to be here.
So Scott Murphy has been in office for barely a year and 3 months. What has he done or not done that makes you think you could do a better job? Or is it simply because he is a vulnerable candidate?
Well, Susan, you know, there's 4 signature issues in this Congress where our representative has not, I believe, reflected the will of our district. You look at, first of all, the way that he was trying to grow the economy. His perspective is that we can do this from Washington, D.C. through the stimulus bill. And in general, that whole method fails us here in New York State. For every dollar we send to Washington, D.C., we get somewhere in the 80s back, 84 cents back based on some studies.
Been before the stimulus.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's been happening for a long time.
Yeah, and then by early accounts on the stimulus, it's been worse than that. So it was going to be a losing proposition for us. And really, what I'll share with you is no epiphany. We listen very closely to small business owners and entrepreneurs across the district, and they tell us how it is that we can stimulate the economy from the private sector side. It's essentially to remove the impediments to growth.
Meaning taxes.
Taxes, regulations, and healthcare costs, which continue to spiral. But I'll give you the overview first, and then we can get into some of the details.
Okay.
So the first thing where we have a significant difference of opinion on this, Mr. Murphy and myself, is how to grow the economy. And although he did not vote because he was not yet in the Congress, he ran on the stimulus, which I think is not the method to grow the economy. And the second thing, the difference between us is his vote for cap and trade. Cap and trade, one method to balance the environment in the economy. I think it's the wrong method. We climb up on the back of small business owners and ordinary Americans.
What would you do?
Well, a number of things. First of all, I think we ought to explore ways to reduce congestion in our area. I mean, I have talked about in the past another lane on the Northway. Individuals on their way home can lose up to 20 to 30 minutes trying to merge in traffic and move.
What about high-speed rail?
High-speed rail, yes, indeed. I'm very interested in that. I think that's another way, and then also looking at ways for cars to cut down on emissions. But I would not do cap and trade. He voted for cap and trade. Cap and trade will hurt our economy. We'll lose jobs. Obviously, the intent of the bill is to make it more expensive for carbon emissions, with the intent to cap to be an influence to try to reduce our emissions.
If we go back to high-speed rail, which is an idea that I guess you support, in the current sort of idea, they would create a new public authority, which means a lot more borrowing, which would just add to the great burden of debt that we're already sort of buckling under from.
No, I think there are other ways to explore this, and I'm not in favor of an authority. In fact, I would tell you, and obviously I'm running for a federal office here in the Congress, but I think part of the reason we're in the trouble in New York State is there's not enough accountability. You look at individuals running for governor, and then you look at these authorities, and it's hard for the executive and the legislative branch to get their arms around these authorities. I would go the other direction. I would have for more accountability, but I don't want to get off point here. I think these are 2 major issues between my opponent and myself. First, how to grow the economy. The second is how to balance the environment in the economy, and I think the cap and trade bill is going to hurt us economically. The third thing is card check. A difference between my opponent.
Is this the immigration issue?
No, card check has to do with a bill that's being advanced by some in the Congress and been co-sponsored by my opponent that believes that we should do away with the private ballot on whether or not companies unionize. So, you're probably familiar with the process now. Petitions are circulated.
So it would be harder to create a union?
Now, what the proposal is now normally it's a two-step process now, where they'll circulate petitions and individuals can sign up if they think that there should be a vote on whether to unionize or not. You get to a certain threshold, and that triggers the vote. But here's what's happened in the past. There's been intimidation as these clipboards, as these signatures, petitions have been passed around. Individuals looking at who is presenting the petition in front of them will sign it. And then when they get in the booth, they vote it down. Not uncommon. So that is a right. It's a right of a worker to have a private ballot to decide whether or not they're going to unionize. This bill would do away with the private ballot.
Okay,
I think that's wrong.
I have a lot of questions. That was 3. You had one other issue that you're running on.
Well, what I would tell you, the 2 major issues that we're running on is how to grow the economy and to control our debt.
So I find it fascinating that you went to the Hoover Institution and that out of that scholarly experience, you wrote a book about how the civilian and the military leadership would interact. Okay, would it be fair to say that why don't you tell me what is it that you would seek to change and how the military leadership and the civilian leadership, that dynamic?
Well, thanks very much. Securing the state really was written, the catalyst for it was I was very disappointed in the way our country was approaching our national security decision-making in the first few years of the war. I didn't think that our elected leaders, the President of the United States and the Congress, were getting the analysis, options, and advice on how to make these key decisions. Particularly here, I'm talking about Iraq, circa 2003 to 2006, but really this is a generalizable point. I looked at this across time over the course of our history. These were 4 case studies that we looked at the revolutionary period, the foundational moment for our country.
I'm just mostly interested in the Iraq.
Well, yeah. I mean, the problem is the way we were going about decisions was very centralized, and it was dominated, in my view, and backed up by the research by the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. And so the competing analysis, options, and advice were not resonating for the President of the United States.
What kind of mistakes took place because that didn't happen?
Well, we under-resourced the war. I mean, this was something that was very pointedly made throughout the conversations in the lead-up to the war. And in the end, the decision was taken that we were going to provide X amount of forces, and that was not sufficient to accomplish the tasks that were laid out by the President of the United States. So what I found in my research is that the process was flawed, and it really stymied the right analysis, options, and advice to resonating to the elected leaders. And incidentally, it's the same dynamic that occurred during Vietnam, the same kind of dynamic. Now, why that's important, I think, is we didn't learn from the past. And keep in mind, those were 2 different political parties, so it's not a partisan comment.
We are going to be right back with Colonel Chris Gibson, who is running for Congress in the 20th Congressional District, which represents 11 counties in an area that's just absolutely huge. It goes from Warren County in the north down to like Dutchess County in the south. We'll be right back.
Support for the Capitol Press Room with Susan Arbetter is provided by CSEA. Celebrating a century of service to all New Yorkers in 2010, every day nearly 300,000 members provide the vital services families across the state depend on. And off the job, we volunteer, helping to make our communities even better places to live.